In this video, I'm going to go over the differences to King Kong vs. Godzilla from 1962 and its American version the following year. With that said, let's dive in. The intros for both versions are different. The Japanese one opens with text of the cast and crew over a scrolling background, which might be texture of one of the monsters, with the Pharaoh Island chant scored by Akira Ifukube playing over it. The US cut does a similar thing, but instead of a scrolling background, it's just a still image of some texture, with the main theme of the 1951 adventure film The Golden Horde, scored by Hans J. Salter, playing over it. After the intro credits, we're shown a globe of the Earth in both versions. The Japanese cut actually stops the globe, and we're shown footage of actor Kenzu Tabu as a reporter of the Wonderful World TV program. Both the TV show and Taku's introduction is cut in the American version. The US cut fades the globe out to black, where we're then shown footage of the United Nations, with a different reporter named Eric Carter played by Michael Keith. The international communication satellite shown in this version is just stock footage from another Toho movie, The Mysterians. We then see more footage of another reporter from Chile not present in the original. We then cut back to Eric, who explains about the icebergs, the berries, and Pharaoh Island. Now, I'm going to do something a little different. The US cut does not follow the Japanese one to a T at all. So to make life a little easier on me, I'll be following the original version and comparing its scenes to that of the US one. Of course, I'll be mentioning added footage along the way and more little details like that when they play in the US version. So with that, let's dive back down. After Tako's introduction, we cut to the nuclear sub known as the Seahawk. The US cut doesn't show this until nearly 9 minutes in the film, with another scene of Eric Carter actually talking to the captain of the sub. Interesting to note, the US version gives the captain the surname Roberts, while he goes nameless in the Japanese cut. There's also another reporter introduced named Yutaka Omura from Japan, but ironically he's not really. When we go inside the sub, all the actors are speaking English in both versions. Despite that, they are still dubbed over in the US version. The water temperature is reported to be 18 degrees in the Japanese cut, while the US has it at 68 degrees. When the captain is looking through the scope, added dialogue is present only in the US version.
That must be it. Let's go down and have a look.
A shot of the glowing iceberg is cut in the dub. While the US version stays on the scene to the end, the Japanese version cuts away from it to a studio recording what looks to be a commercial. This is also where we're introduced to our main lead, Osamu Sakurai, played by Taruo Takashima, though this entire moment is removed in the US version. However, the scene that follows is the very first scene we're shown in the US version after the long Eric Carter dialogue scene, making this moment the introduction of both Sakurai and Tako in the US version. After this scene, we cut to two different establishing shots in both versions, though after about a second or two of it being daytime in the US cut, we cut to the right location where it's shown to be nighttime now, though the interior shots still aren't lined up. The Japanese version has Sakurai looking for his sister, who is in the apartment next door, which is her boyfriend's, Kazuo Fujita, played by Kenji Sahara. The US version cuts that and has us already at the dinner table, though in this scene radio music is only heard in the Japanese version. After Fujita shows his invention, some small talk with the trio is cut in the dub. After this moment, we're finally back in the sub in the original, though this is short-lived again as we cut away from the sub to a celebration party of the crew preparing to go to Pharaoh Island. This scene is not present at all in the dub. Shortly after, we're back at the sub. A few seconds of the captain are trimmed down, along with the water spewing in the dub. Some seconds of the crew reacting to the fire are cut down. In fact, the scene where one of the men say Godzilla is cut. After that, we then cut to a ship heading toward Pharaoh Island, though the ship is in a different angle in both versions, with the US one using a clip from a later scene. The Japanese version introduces the natives via a lookout, while the US cuts to the main location already, though we do go back to the right scene a few seconds afterward. Some more rearranging when the natives are running toward the crew. The Japanese cut now shows the main location. Though now hearing it, I've noticed that the US cut adds some more instruments and vocals in that version of the scene. When the trio are talking to the chief, drums are heard only in the dub. When lightning is shown striking over the mountain after the conversation, there's a small delay in the Japanese version. After this, we cut to two different moments with Fumiko. The Japanese one has her watching TV with a friend, which is completely cut in the dub, while the US one has her discovering Fujita's plane has crashed. After Fumiko's moment in the original, we're now with Fujita aboard a ship where they discover the distress signal from the Seahawk. This moment is removed in the dub. Some parts with the helicopter pilots are either rearranged, trimmed, or cut in the US version. When Godzilla is revealed in the iceberg, the US version zooms in on the scene. Also after this scene, we get another moment with Eric Carter in the dub, with a scene of actor Akihiko Harada playing after it. As for the Godzilla versus the military moment, scenes are rearranged heavily, but I really didn't notice anything being cut other than a few seconds of tanks driving forward. Omura interrupts the final moment in the dub with footage from the Mysterians playing on a TV beside him. After the attack, the Japanese version cuts to newspaper headlines not featured in the dub. The scene with Akihiko Harada now plays in the Japanese cut. More newspaper headlines along with the scene of Tako are removed, though the US cut does use half the scene after Godzilla's attack on the military. In fact, I forgot to mention Godzilla's final moment of that scene is played on the TV in the US cut, though the footage is zoomed in. Followed by this scene, Tako turns the TV off in the dub, while he turns off a radio in the Japanese version. After Tako's scene in the original, we then go back to Pharaoh Island. Before this scene in the dub, we get to another Eric Carter moment, where he is now accompanied by Dr. Arnold Johnson, played by Harry Holcomb. This scene also writes out the first two movies by having dialogue announce that Godzilla had remained frozen in the iceberg for thousands of years, which makes this the second time a Godzilla sequel tries to de-sequelify itself from the American cut. Also, Harry seems to have trouble saying the word reptile. A moment with Sakurai and Furu is trimmed. A moment with Furu swinging a giant lizard is shortened. Lightning is again delayed a bit in the original. A scene with Furu in bed is cut. A scene with Sakurai and Kono is shortened. A scene with Sakurai asking Kono what is wrong is removed. A scene with Furu putting on his shoes is cut. The native dance scene is shortened down in the US cut. When the scene fades to black, both versions open up with footage not shown in the opposite cut. A scene with Sakurai and Furu inside the ship is cut. After Tako arrives on the ship, a scene with him, Sakurai, and Furu inside it are cut. After they see another ship incoming, which has a different horn in both versions, we cut back to the Fumiko scene that was played earlier in the dub. Going back to that moment in the US cut, the characters read the paper as if Fujita's plane had crashed, though there's no mention of a plane in the original, and even looking at the paper we see a picture of a ship in both versions. We then cut to a scene of Fujita coming home. The dub adds the same shot of the Tokyo scene we saw earlier, which again cuts to the real footage, which is again set to nighttime, or at least almost. The scene where the train passes by is used twice in the Japanese version. Following that scene, we get to a moment with Omura in the dub, and following that moment we see footage again from the Mysterians not present in the original scene, along with the scene that plays after Godzilla's train attack scene in the Japanese version. Also, the commanding officer here is played by Jun Tazaki, goes nameless in the original, but is given the name Masami Shinzo in the dub. Two scenes with the military spotting Godzilla in Hokkaido are cut in the dub. A scene with Fujita driving is also cut in the dub. A moment with Fujita and Fumiko is removed as well. After Godzilla's attack, we go to the military scene I mentioned earlier in the Japanese cut, while we go to Kong waking up on the raft in the dub. This scene does however play after that military moment in the original. The entire Kong scene with him waking up is a one-for-one shot in both versions, with nothing really cut at all. After this scene, we are again set to two different locations in both versions. The Japanese one has us with military and construction vehicles setting up a trap for Godzilla, with some footage not present in the American cut. Also, a scene with Kong on a rampage is moved to a later part in the dub. The American version adds a scene with Omura explaining where Kong is. When the group is driving toward the first fight, the radio segment of this part is played first in the original and a bit later in the dub. Also, both Omura and Johnson are only heard on the radio in the dub. A scene with the group hiding from the military is cut. Two moments with Kong roaring are shortened down. After the short kaiju battle, we again cut to two different locations. The dub has us back with Carter and Johnson explaining to us what we just saw, followed by a few scenes with the military, with Carter narrating over the segment. The Japanese cut shows a short montage of the electrical blockade, which is shown in a later part in the dub, but with the picture darkened to give the illusion of nighttime. A scene with Dr. Shekizawa is heavily edited in the dub. The scene is shortened, narrated over, and also has the same dark filter over it. A scene with Godzilla has a binocular POV shot in the dub. The Godzilla pit scene is largely unchanged in the dub. Aside from when Godzilla falls in the pit, there's additional footage used from the Mysterians. After this scene, we are set again to two different locations. The dub puts us back with Omura, Carter, and Johnson, telling us Godzilla has a weakness to electricity, while Kong grows stronger from it. The Japanese cut has us back with the military and an incoming report that Kong is in Tokyo. This scene would appear later in the dub. Also, a scene with King Kong is removed. A moment with Sakurai, Fujita, and Fumiko is removed, though some segments of this scene are present with an additional radio broadcast in the dub only. A scene with Godzilla is shortened along with the military setting up the blockade. A moment with Shigezawa is cut. A montage of people evacuating is present only in the dub, using footage again from the Mysterians. Every scene with Sakurai, Furu, and Tako watching Kong destroy the blockade is cut. Scenes with Kong destroying the electrical towers are rearranged in the dub. A scene with Kong releasing his jaw is cut. For better or worse, some scenes with Fujita screaming are removed. A moment with Kong scratching himself is cut. The moment where the characters are putting Kong to sleep have almost all the scenes rearranged, but as far as I can see, nothing seems to be cut, though a moment with Kong turning around and falling is shortened. An overhead shot of the city is present only in the dub, though where this footage comes from, I'm not too sure. If anyone has an idea, please let me know. A shot of Mount Fuji is present only in the dub. This scene, again, is from the Mysterians. An odd fade to black moment occurs in the Japanese version. When the fight starts with Kong and Godzilla, there are a few seconds trimmed here and there, but nothing major. A scene with Kong kicking a boulder is cut. When Kong gets burnt in the Japanese version, the scene stays focused on him a little bit longer. A scene with Kong pounding his chest is cut. The wind-up with Kong throwing a rock is shortened. When Godzilla kicks Kong to the ground, additional footage was cut in the American version. Scenes are heavily rearranged when Godzilla is kicking rocks towards Kong. A small second of lightning is shown during the conversation in the helicopter scene only in the dub. A shot of the helicopter is cut. A moment with Dr. Shigezawa is cut. When Godzilla and Kong splash into the water, an additional scene is present only in the dub. When the earthquake occurs in the battle, additional footage is used from the Mysterians again. A few seconds of the characters spotting Kong out at sea is trimmed down. A scene with Shigezawa receiving a radio was cut. A final moment with the characters is removed. The American version gives us one last scene with Carter by a TV set with Kong on it. The final shot of the movie gives us two different end title cards, obviously one in Japanese and one in English. One final thing to note is that Kong's roars are heard only in the dub, while the Japanese version has both Kong's and one Godzilla roar heard in its version. The original version runs for about an hour and 37 minutes, while the US cut goes for around an hour and 31 minutes. Despite the shorter runtime, the US version adds a lot of additional footage not present in the Japanese cut. I want to say more so than the previous two movies have, using a lot of footage from the Toho sci-fi classic The Mysterians, as well as footage from various sources. And like the first movie, it also adds American actors. Though unlike Burr, these guys really aren't talked about, or even worth mentioning for that matter. Because maybe beside from Harry Holcomb, none of these people were big name actors like Burr was at the time. Though they do an okay job acting, I guess. They just don't do anything in the movie itself. At times they just look bored or tired of being there. I'm sure we all know by now that Burr wasn't in the original movie, but let's look at it this way. The character he plays, Steve Martin the journalist, is at least active somewhat in the American version of that movie. He's right there in the moment with Godzilla, putting his own life in dire situations. Hell, it almost gets him killed at one point. Say what you will, but at least Burr is taking the role seriously. Here, the characters don't act nor behave as if this is a life-threatening situation. They remain stoic throughout the entire film and smile at trivia facts about the creature, like Godzilla's pea-sized brain. He's such a stupid dinosaur. So stupid that he at least knows better not to hit the electrical towers again after it hurt him. I'm sure some of you already know this, but the score was mostly, but not entirely changed in the American version, with stock music from various Universal Pictures. The Japanese cut has veteran composer Akira Ifukube sounding the score. His music in this movie is incredible. It's a very ominous score that fits well with a lot of the moments. He also introduces Godzilla's main theme in this movie, which we in the West wouldn't hear until the next movie. It's hard for me to really say what score fits the movie better. I've grown to watch the dub many times with the stock music, so much so that when I actually hear the music the movies were supposed to be for, I instantly think, wow, that's the score from King Kong vs. Godzilla, when it really isn't. Overall, music-wise, I think both versions do a fine job, but my vote would have to go to the original because it's original. Not to say the US music doesn't work with the movie. In fact, I'll even admit some segments with the American music actually fits better. In terms of dubbing, it's actually not too bad. Granted, it's only a handful of people dubbing every character, but it works. For one, when they dub the characters, they actually sound like people. They don't give them this stereotypical Asian accent, like how some of the cast was in the Gigantus dub. Not a perfect dub, but it's definitely better than most. As for the segments that were cut, I'd say the American version does a nice job cutting unnecessary segments. It trims a lot of the fat that doesn't need to be there. The party scene with the crew ready for Pharaoh Island is fun, but in the long run it's just filler. Speaking of which, I like how the dub stays linear with the scenes more so than the Japanese one does. Like when we're here at the submarine. That's it. We're not constantly cutting away to other things to break up the pace. Which is one thing I have to commend the dub for, is that it keeps moving. For the most part. We're not wasting time with Taco hiding from the military like he's in a cartoon. In fact, the Japanese must have known there was so much filler, because when they re-released this movie for an event, they actually trimmed the movie down themselves. And who could blame them? Like, do I have to see Pharaoh put on his shoes before he goes out to battle the octopus? Now the final question stands on which version is better. To be honest, either version of the film works fine, but I'm gonna have to say the American cut is probably the superior version. It's more linear with its story, cuts a lot of the filler out, and even has a decent dub. I can go without the inserted actors since they do nothing but spout nonsense facts the writers made up and tell us stuff that we've either already seen or are about to see. But overall, both versions are fine. It's really just a matter of, do you want to read subtitles or don't you?
Connect 4, the game where you've got to think big to connect 4 and win. Connect 4, the big game in town.